future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Christy Reeves. Welcome to another episode of Rebel Hearts. I am so excited you're joining us today, and it's such an honor to introduce today's guest to you in one moment. And I actually, on my left, is Mr. Tony Sweet over here.
Hello, my dear.
Yay. And I asked him to come on in and co-host a little bit with me today.
My pleasure.
I am excited. He said, yay!
Yay! I did a high kick.
Woohoo! And it was actually a few years ago that my dear friend Eric called me, and Eric is also my producing partner. He said, Christy, I came across this book and you have to read it. No way around it. You have to read it. It's amazing. So, of course, I listened to Eric and I read it. And it was a book called The Field by a woman named Lynne McTaggart. And I had studied some psychosomatic medicine and family constellation work and epigenetics and kinesiology and really studied how our thoughts shape our reality. And Lynne's book really filled in a lot of the missing blanks over here to what I was learning. And she's really amazing of bridging spirituality and science. So I loved her book, The Field. And now she came out with her newest book called The Power of 8. And it's absolutely incredible. I cannot share with you what she found out and some of the experiments she did. She'll share with you in a few moments. But let me tell you a little bit more about Lynne. Lynne McTaggart is one of the essential voices in the New Consciousness movement. She's the award-winning author of 7 books, including worldwide bestsellers The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and her latest book, The Power of 8. She also serves as editorial director of What Doctors Don't Tell You, www.wddty.com, one of the world's most highly praised health publications. Lynne and her husband, WDDTY founder Brian Robert, live and work in London, UK, and you're calling in from London, UK today. And Rebel Hearts, let me welcome Lynne McTaggart. Lynne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be with you guys.
I was just saying to you, you're such a rebel heart, so you're so perfect for today's show. And I'm so honored to talk with you about everything that you're doing.
I love being a rebel heart.
Before we get into the power of 8, I actually want to find out what got you started on the path that you're on. Because I sometimes feel, we see what you're doing right now and sharing your journey and how you got to where you are right now. Like, I usually find gives our listeners an inspiration of finding maybe their own journey and becoming a rebel heart as well. So why don't you share a little bit with us?
Well, it's very interesting. I don't think lives get paved out in any kind of logical fashion. Mm-hmm. We just have things happen to us and then we respond to them. And from there, we basically create our life.
Yeah.
And for me, I started out life as an investigative reporter. I mean, that's what I do. And I, my first jobs in my 20s were busting baby selling rings and having hidden microphones and tape recorders. But I came over to the UK to do a book, and I got ill, and nobody could find out what was wrong with me. And I went from the very conventional doctors to the very outer rim of alternative doctors, and no one seemed to understand what it was. Now we would say I had a faulty microbiome, but back then nobody knew what it was.
A lot of people still don't know what a microbiome is.
Yeah, I know, bad gut population.
Yeah.
So, and I started looking to try to find someone who could heal me. And I finally found a doctor who I thought who was a real pioneer in nutritional medicine. This is back in the 80s. Then I figured out what I thought I had. And essentially together, we worked together to make me better. And we did. And I was so impressed by that I just probably got pretty boring on the subject. So my husband sort of turned to me one day and said, "Don't tell me, tell the world."
Yeah.
So we set up a magazine. Well, back then it was a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And it was looking critically at conventional medicine and offering better alternatives. So I was doing that in the early 90s, and the magazine is now a magazine in in 17 countries, I think it is now. But back then, when we were first looking at medical literature, which is what we do, we study the medical literature every month to see, oftentimes the train wreck that is conventional medicine. And in the prospect of doing that, I came across a lot of really good studies of spiritual healing. And I kept thinking to myself, wait a minute, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works.
Absolutely.
So I set upon really trying to figure this one out. And I convinced my publishers to let me do a book that was basically a journey without a compass. And I didn't know what I was going to find. So I started speaking to frontier scientists who are doing this kind of consciousness research, figuring they'll be able to tell me what I'm looking for and what it is. And I thought, oh, it's probably going to be human energy fields. But when I started talking to them, I realized to my astonishment that each of them had discovered a tiny piece of what really compounded into a completely new view of the world. And yet they don't like to speculate. They don't like to move beyond their own little experimental patch. And they also don't like to speak in English. They speak in code. They speak in math. So I realized that pretty soon that I was going to have to both decode what they were talking about and then put it all together. So that became the field. But there was a big piece of it that intrigued me, which was the whole idea that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. That was kind of some unfinished business. And because I am a journalist by training, I tend to be skeptical of things. And this was around the time that The Secret was coming out and people were talking about the law of attraction. And for me, all I could think about was, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about just making subtle shifts in a quantum particle, or are we talking about curing cancer? And also, what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time? Does that magnify the effect? So I was so curious about that. I thought, well, I'm going to put this to the ultimate test. I've got lots of readers around the world because my books are in 30 languages. And I also know a lot of these scientists in frontier consciousness research. If I put them together, I would have the biggest global laboratory in the world. And so that's really what I did. I started a thing called the intention experiment to test how far we can take this.
So tell us, what is the extension experiment?
What happens is every so often, and I've been doing this since 2007, I will set up a controlled experiment with some scientists, and I'll then invite my audience, my internet audience, or an actual audience if I'm speaking somewhere, to send a particular intention, a particular thought to whatever our target is. I mean, we started out very small with just trying to do subtle effects on a leaf and trying to make seeds grow faster. And then we moved on to trying to purify water. And then we moved on to trying to lower violence in a war-torn area, and also trying to heal somebody of post-traumatic stress disorder. So they would do that, and then the scientists would work on the results. And now I never expected this was going to work. To be honest, I thought we might have a little bit of an effect, but I wasn't really sure we were going to have any major effect.
And the effects
but
were
we
huge.
did. We had a huge effect. Of the 30 experiments we've done to date and tallied the results of, 26 of them have shown measurable, significant, mostly positive effects. Now, just to put that in context, there's no pharmaceutical drug out there that has that kind of consistent track record.
Wow, that's amazing. And you started with like different, like with Dr. Gary Schwartz, you did the leaf experiment. Tell us a little bit more about the leaf experiment and what happened as an example of that power of thought through the group intention.
Well, the leaf experiment was our very first one, and all we were trying to do was affect the light emissions coming off of it. Now, all living things have a tiny current of light that they send out, and we were trying to affect it. We were trying to make it glow brighter, and we had a control leaf, and I did this live with in front of an audience in London, and we had a camera that was trained on the leaf we were sending intention to, and Gary's team had poked a lot of holes in this leaf because you need a lot of data points to compare with when you're doing an experiment like this. So we sent intention to this geranium leaf, and afterward he wrote me and said it was unbelievable. The leaf sent intention was glowing so much that it's like the control leaf that wasn't sent intention. It was like it was having a neglect effect. It was darker than usual. It was really weird. But we moved on to experiments where they really tested something that is common and something that is more understandable, which was we wanted to see if we can make seeds grow faster. So what the scientists would do would be to have 4 sets of seeds, A, B, C, and D, 30 seeds each. They would photograph the seeds. And this was also University of Arizona, although we've worked with many scientists around the world. They would send me all 4 sets of photographs. I would then ask my internet audience or an actual audience to choose one of the 4 sets. We would send intention to the one we chose. We wouldn't tell the scientists which ones we were sending intention to. We'd tell them we were done when we were finished. They would then plant the seeds, all 4 sets of seeds, measure them after 5 days and tell us which ones grew faster. And we ran that experiment 12 times, and every single time the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than the controls.
That is absolutely incredible. Wow.
But think about it for a second too. The first time we ran it, I was in Sydney, Australia, in front of an audience of 700. Those seeds were sitting in Tucson, Arizona, 8,000 miles away. Nevertheless, we had an effect. Plus the fact we weren't sending intention to the actual thing, we were sending intention to a photograph of the thing. So we were just sending intention to a symbol of those seeds, and nevertheless, we had an effect. So that was really quite amazing.
That is.
And I like to think we were creating a sort of psychic internet.
Lynne, can I ask you a quick question? I have a question. As you know, I've worked with many investigative reporters, and like you said, the skepticism that comes with your nature. When you see, like, because I grew up in Kansas, where a lot of spirituality is kind of a bunch of woo-woo stuff. So when you see a seed that grows, is there ever in the back of your mind going, that's just a coincidence?
Well, maybe if you did it once, but because we did it 12 times.
And every single time.
Every single time when we sent intention, the seeds sent intention grew higher than the controls. That's why you run it again and again and again. Right. Then it's not just coincidence. Then it's starting to get something, it's starting to get really interesting.
That's awesome.
And as I say, and with that particular study, we actually published it in a scientific journal. So it was that rigorous, it was that good. But that doesn't mean, my skepticism kept asking a lot of questions.
Oh, sure.
And the interesting thing about those experiments were that, yes, they worked, but they're not the interesting part of the story.
So
well, I want to hear
what
the
is
interesting part of
that. I mean, that was already interesting, so let's get more
the interesting part of the story started actually in 2008. This was about the same year we were doing a lot of those seed experiments and a few others. We'd run a number of water experiments too. And I thought to myself, well, I guess it's time that I run a workshop. But because I was thinking, well, people who do this kind of work, they run workshops. But I'd never run a workshop before. And I'm a reporter, as I say, by background. So I wasn't really sure what to do. And how do I help people demonstrate the power of intention over a weekend. I knew from studying intention with intention masters, master healers, Qigong masters, Buddhist monks, and also seeing what worked in the laboratory, I knew how to do intention. I knew which systems work, which techniques worked best. And I had distilled them into a simple program I called Powering Up, which is a distillation of all the commonalities between these different disciplines. But I wasn't sure, well, how do you do it in a small group? And I was trying to think about how to do this, how to run this workshop. And so I finally turned to my husband and I said, when we were mulling it over one day, well, I don't know, I'll just put them in groups of 8 and just have them send healing intention to a member of the group with some sort of health challenge. And my husband, who's a great headline writer, said, yeah, I love it, the power of 8.
That's where it was born.
That's how it came about. So we did it. It was the spring of 2008 in Chicago. And we put people in groups of 8. I asked them to all hold hands, to send an intention to some member of the group, the same intention, somebody with a health challenge. And, I'm telling them to do this and that, and to visualize and do this stuff. And I'm basically making it up as I go along, because I'm not really sure how to do this in a small group. So we did. And I asked them to come back the next day, and I figured it was going to be a feel-good exercise, a little bit like a facial.
Yeah.
So I asked them to come back and to talk about their experience. We hand them a mic in turn. They take it, and that's not what happened. It wasn't like a facial at all. They said things like this. I have terrible arthritis. I usually walk with a terrible limp, and I'm feeling normal, and I'm walking normally today. I have terrible headaches and have done for years every day of my life, and my migraines are gone. I have terrible IBS, and my stomach feels clear today. One woman had cataracts and said they were 80% better. Amazing. I was just dumbfounded. I was shocked. My husband was shocked. We were just looking at each other aghast.
And that was
I dismissed it.
Yeah. And that was just from one group sitting, right? Just like from one experiment. They only experienced that intention once, right?
Yeah, little groups of 8, each of them sending intention to one member of the group with a health challenge. 10 minutes. That was it.
That was it? 10 minutes? Whoa.
10 minutes. So I was just shocked by this, and I dismissed it as a placebo effect. I thought, oh, well, this is just expectation. But in every workshop I ran, and I've run hundreds of them now, there were people who had amazing healings. We had a woman, and it happens in every single workshop I run. There's a woman with scoliosis who was really in terrible pain. Her pain vanished after she was the object of a group. And then her daughter wrote me a few months later to say they'd had to change the rear view mirror in her car because her back had straightened so much that she had to look out of the mirror differently. We had a woman who had stroke and couldn't focus her eyes. And yet after her 10 minutes of intention, her eyes focused normally. We had a woman with multiple sclerosis who came in the next day without her crutches, and another woman with terrible arthritis who was walking normally the next day. We had hundreds and hundreds of people like this. And every single time these people sent intention, a goodly number of them had major, major healings. So, and the other interesting point about it was that it wasn't just the receivers, it was the senders too.
You talk about how all of a sudden the senders are having positive health effects, right? And positive things happening in their lives.
Well, that was the thing, and that was the amazing thing, both in the big experiments and the small Power of 8 groups. The other thing that happened is I decided to run some peace intention experiments. And we had some really interesting results. Our first one was, we sent intention to Sri Lanka, which was that had been in the midst of a 25-year war. And nobody was winning. The government and the rebels were both at an impasse. And the rebels had choked off the entire north. So we sent the intention over 8 days. And violence actually went up during the time we sent intention. So I was getting a little worried there. But what happened is it looked like that week, and we were looking back over 25 years before and a few months afterward, because my scientific team wanted to see what kind of long-term trend there was and whether or not we bucked the trend. So we looked at all of that data, and we found that our week was actually, even though it was very violent that week, it plummeted afterward. So there was a lowering of violence. It did buck the trend over time. It bucked the trend immediately afterward. But more importantly, that very week of our intention, those 8 days, turned out to be absolutely pivotal in the course of the war. The government won a couple of decisive battles that turned around the war so that they were able to reclaim the North. And then a few months after that, that 25-year war was over. Now, did we do this? The short answer, who knows? Yeah. But more interesting was, even than that, was the reaction among my participants. I surveyed them to find out how it was for them. I wanted to find out if they could get on their internet. And remember, they were all sending intention from their own individual computer screens. Nevertheless, I got in thousands of responses, and there had been about 25, I think about 15,000 people on that particular study. Hundreds and hundreds of them wrote back, thousands wrote back things like, I felt I was part of a higher network. I was feeling uncontrollable tingling and sobbing uncontrollably as during the experiment. I had electricity coursing through my body. I felt like I was the tractor beam in the middle of Star Trek. Once again, what is going on here? They were describing a mystical experience. It was just extraordinary. But also, they started talking about how their lives had changed. Their lives were becoming more peaceful. They made up with estranged relatives. They were getting along better with their coworkers and their family. They were, getting along better with their bosses, even if they weren't so nice. They were falling in love with strangers. Something like 40-something% said that they were in love with everyone they came into contact with. It was like they were hugging strangers.
That is amazing.
And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here?
Yeah. And I am wondering, the people who participated feels that it came from such a place of just pure compassion and love without any ego or this thing about I have to do something for me, or this is about me and I have to heal myself. And do you believe that this is the reason why it came back so unconditionally to them and created such a change in them as well?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Christy. The one piece that people don't usually look at in the self-help movement is other help. Look at the name of it, self-help. It's all about me. But what's going on in these groups is altruism. People are sending intention for someone else. And yet they're getting healing effects too. And we tested this. I was being skeptical. I wanted to test this from every possible angle. So one of the tests I gave, it was to actually get together 250 people, just randomly from my community, and invite them to be part of an intention masterclass that would run for an entire year. So I gave them 6 weeks of training and then put them in groups small groups of 8 or so to work with for an entire year. And then I monitored them month by month to see how they did. Now, of the people who stayed together in groups, pretty much, and that was about 150 of them who met week after week, pretty much 100% of them had major life transformations.
Amazing.
I'm talking about healing major illnesses. A guy had lifelong depression, a clinical psychologist, no less, who had tried everything, every integrative thing, and nothing had worked for him. When his group sent him intention to find the cause of this, it prompted him to go to a certain, I think, traditional Chinese medicine healer who found that one of his liver filtration systems wasn't working. He went and got it fixed. And after that, his depression ended.
Wow.
Another woman with 15 years worth of chronic fatigue is now lifting weights and doing hikes. She could barely walk for 5 minutes.
Wow.
We had that. We had major career changes where people got dream jobs, had financial windfalls just when they needed it. Amazing things like woman was down to her last 200 pounds from the UK and suddenly gets after her group sends an intention for her to have steady income. She gets a letter from Lloyd's of London saying she's qualifying for a special kind of windfall of income. And on it went like that. It was really extraordinary. But not everyone had this. And here's my big point. A few people didn't. One of those was a woman called Andy, who Andy was going through a divorce. She didn't have steady income. She'd sold her gift store business and she needed a new job. She wanted something really fulfilling and joyful, but well-paying. And every time she was trying to get it, and she was very well qualified, she just couldn't get a job. And everybody was intending for her, and we were trying everything with her. And finally, I was frustrated by it. And so I just said, Andy, just get off of yourself. Stop intending for yourself. Intend for someone else. And I had got the group involved and interested in doing a healing vigil for a young boy called Luke, 15-year-old, whose stepfather had written me because in a fit of existential angst after breaking up with his first serious girlfriend, he threw himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. And the doctors didn't think he was going to live. He was in the hospital. He'd broken everything. He'd got nerve damage, brain damage, etc. So our master class started sending him healing intention. I think we did it 3 different times while his stepfather was carefully noting any responses. And the responses seemed to really correlate. Upshot was Luke got better. He went home from the hospital in record time, which was incredible.
Yeah.
Maybe it was good doctoring, maybe it was us. But more importantly was what happened to Andy.
Okay.
I mean, it was brilliant what happened to Luke, but Andy, the moment she got off herself and started sending intention to Luke, she gets a call out of nowhere with her dream job, an offer from someone she didn't even know, offering her dream job. And so it went on over and over and over again. And I got so interested in that, I really had to look at the science of altruism, which shows it is essentially like a bulletproof vest. People who do for others are happier, healthier, live longer in every regard.
Yeah. And what comes to me too, it's our society has so been conditioned by the Darwinian concept of the survival of the fittest. And it's created such a separation consciousness in our society. So your experiments and everything that you're sharing with us actually proves that the opposite is true, that by us coming together and getting our focus off of ourselves and coming from a place of the heart and compassion, we're actually healing ourselves and we're healing the world at the same time.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. This is what's so interesting about it, is the giving is better for you than the receiving. And we saw that there's an amazing study looking at the effect of prayer for mental illness. The guy who ran it was a psychologist, but also a priest who wanted to see if you could use prayer for mental illness. There's plenty of studies of prayer healing physical illness, but he wanted to see, okay, can we heal depression?
Yeah.
So he got together 400 volunteers, all of whom had depression. And he put them into 2 groups. One group were going to get the prayer, and the other group were going to give the prayer. So he then measured them on all kinds of parameters afterward to see if they'd been improved. And the people who got the prayer were definitely improved. They got better, but not as improved as the people who gave the prayer. They were off the charts. So that and a number of other studies just demonstrate the power of altruism and how it is healing for the sender, healing for the healer.
That's amazing. And you write in your book that there's been experiments or research, and I want to call it the critical mass, that if 1% of the population does, for example, transcendental meditation, it actually changed the environment around. So,
well, the interesting thing about that, Christy, is our studies actually proved that a critical mass isn't necessary. Because, some of our studies, which we repeated over and over again, work just as well whether we had thousands or just 100 people. I think what's powerful, what all you need, you don't need necessarily a certain size. What you need is a group of any size. And then I think that's what's powerful. That's what's transformational to everyone. And then for the environment.
Yeah. That's amazing. So share a little bit more about the intention. So do you visualize something specific? Do you send energy? What do you usually have your people do when you ask them to set intentions? Or does it vary, or is it more a personal thing that everybody feels?
Okay, you frame it positively, but probably the most important thing of all, where I differ from a lot of people, is it's got to be specific.
Yeah.
Most people aren't very specific when they send intention. They will say something nebulous like, well, I want to be rich. And they may want to be rich, but they usually don't want to be rich per se, as in lots of money. What they want is a new job, or they want more time to be with their children or grandchildren, or they want more time to pursue a hobby, or they want to just change what they do and have something more fulfilling. And they think, well, if I had a lot of money, then I could do that. But they don't necessarily want to be rich. It's like a masterclass I ran where one of the groups said, we're all going to intend to win the lottery. And I said, well, okay, that's pretty general and pretty unlikely. But I said, okay, and why? And they said, well, because Jane she needs some more money to raise her child. And Joe over here wants to buy a new car. So we thought, if we won the lottery, then everybody would have enough money. And I said, well, why don't you just intend for Jane to have the money she needs to bring up her child, and Joe to have the money he needs to buy the new car? And that's just an example of it. You need to be really specific. So if people are trying to heal the big toe of the left foot of Jane Doe, they need to say that. Our intention is that Jane Doe's, big toe on her left foot be free of pain and healthy and well in every way. So be really specific. That's really important. But the thing that's so amazing about this that I discovered was it takes techniques, and that's what I teach, but it doesn't take years and years and years of practice and priming and the things that happen in other situations like this, where you have these major mystical experiences and transformations. And I know this because we subjected this to a scientific study. I was finally really curious about, well, what's going on in these power of 8 senders and recipients? What's happening in their brains? So luckily, Life University, which is the largest chiropractic university in the world, I'd spoken in front of them in 2015, and they very kindly offered to have me to put their neuroscience department and their psychology departments at my disposal. So I was just really overwhelmed by their generosity. So we ran 7 experiments recruiting volunteers from the student body.
Okay.
And we put them into groups, and one of the members of the group had a EEG cap on measuring their brainwaves. And we found every single time, almost immediately, there were major brain transformations, turning off the parts of the brain, or turning them way down, that have to do with distinguishing ourself from not self, from other things out there. And also turning way down the parts of the brain that have to do with worry, doubt, negativity. So these were the brainwave signatures of people who were basically experiencing an ecstatic state of oneness.
Wow.
And they were absolutely, virtually identical to the brainwave signatures that were recorded by a fellow called Dr. Andrew Newberg of the University of Pennsylvania when he was studying Sufi masters and Buddhist monks in the midst of ecstatic prayer.
Oh my gosh.
So that was extraordinary to me, but also, aside from being a revelation, it was really fascinating because I was thinking about, in those circumstances, people have to usually go through years of training.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Or hours of, excuse me, hours of priming, or years of practice to get into that state. Our people were total novices. Most of the students hadn't even meditated before. Nevertheless, almost immediately, they were transported into this state. And all they'd had in terms of training was a 13-minute video from me telling them the rudimentaries of how to do it. So in my mind, this was essentially an evidence that this group effect is like a fast track to the miraculous.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need ayahuasca, and you don't need a sweat lodge, and you don't need years of discipline deprivation to get into a mystical state. All you need is a group.
That's incredible. Tony, we need to do that here at UBN.
I know. I would love to. Let's do it.
I have a question about the participants. So let's say some of our listeners want to start working with the power of intention. For all the skeptics out there, do you need to believe that it will work in order for it to work?
Well, no. I mean, look at Luke, the young boy I talked to you about. You know, it may have worked very well on him. You know, there are a lot of variables there, but he certainly got out of the hospital in record time. And I certainly know it wasn't a placebo effect because unlike his parents who believe in all of this stuff, Luke thought the power of intention was pretty stupid. So like most teenagers, you know, he just thought this whole thing is pretty stupid. So no, you don't have to believe in it to work. It helps, but it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
As far as the skeptics are never going to accept it anyway. So unless they experience it for themselves, as I did. So I don't really write for them.
That's amazing. I love the story that Luke did not believe in it, and then he saw the results. It's so wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Lynne, how has your own life changed with everything that you've been witnessing and experiencing and finding out?
Well, I think it's changed in a huge way. I mean, first of all, it's completely turned me in a new direction. And so all of my books are very much about trying to explore this further and just follow my enthusiasms about, you know, what we need to find out next. I mean, the intention experiment really was to look at the power of consciousness and how far we can take it. And the bond was about looking at, well, if this new science says we're very different from what we've been told, the way we live is according to what we've been told. As you said, the bond very much looks at the Darwinian survival of the fittest model and says, well, this isn't true. All of the new science coming forward, whether it's physics or biology or all the ologies, demonstrate that we are much better and we thrive only when we are givers and sharers, when we are connected, not separate and competing. We were never meant to be competitive. So the bond was really, how do we live according to this new science? And now the power of 8 is really, you know, the power of small groups and what you can do with them.
And do you find there's a minimum number of participants for it to work? Or is 8 the magic minimum number for us?
Well, as I shared earlier, 8 was an accidental discovery. I wasn't setting out to do 8, and there's no sacred geometry involved. I think it's what I like to call a Goldilocks number. You know, it still works with 7, it works with 9. I think if you get smaller than 5, it's too small, and more than 12, about 12, it gets to be a little unwieldy.
So for all of our listeners who are hopefully all inspired right now and want to do these intention experiments themselves, do you have any advice of them maybe, you know, getting together in groups? Do you offer workshops on that? How can they learn about how to do these intention experiments?
Okay. Well, they can buy my book, which has it has a lot of advice about how to set up a group and how to run it and how to run these little experiments yourselves as a group. If they don't have a group of people themselves or a group around them, they can come on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, and go on the forum part, which is lynnmctaggart.com/forum. And in there are hundreds of people setting up groups, virtual groups. And they're setting them up by various time zones. So they can join in with a group or advertise to start a group in their time zone. So that's one way. And also, our master class for the year, I just run one a year, has already started. It's started, and we're in week 4 already. But I have a retreat also. I do one of these a year in Tuscany this year. It is the end of September, beginning of October, and we have just 30 people there. And we will be doing intensive intention work alone and in groups in the mornings. And then in the afternoon, we get to go to Florence, Siena, San Gimignano, the Chianti Trail, and, just sample the wine, the foods, and just enjoy ourselves at this gorgeous villa. So if you'd like more information about that, either go on my website under events, or you can go to globalj.org, where they're running the event. So there's a place to really have an incredible intention intensive.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I saw on your website you have another peace experiment coming up in the fall.
Well, we ran an amazing one last autumn. And we'll be doing ones like this because we now have the technology. With this experiment, which was run in November, I was speaking at a studio that was had the technology to connect to 9 different screens. 8 of those screens were connected to conference rooms in 8 different Arab countries that were filled with people from those countries. So we had Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Oman and Bahrain, etc. The 9th screen was filled by an auditorium full of Jewish people from Jerusalem. And we all got together and set intention to lower violence in one area of Jerusalem that has had high crime. So that, maybe we will have an effect, maybe we didn't. This was just a few months ago. We're looking at, some of the scientific effects, and it looks like we did have an amazing field effect. But what was more interesting was what happened between the participants. Because those screens are interactive, people can talk to each other, they can talk to me, and the Arabs started sending love to the Jews. The Jews started saying things like, "Your God is my God" to the Arabs.
Oh my God.
They were forgiving each other. They were connecting in a way they never do. And, they were sobbing together. It was just incredible. I was just sitting there again thinking, my gosh, this is history. History being made. Because as one Arab woman said to me afterward, we never have seen a Jew before. We've never actually seen a Jew before. We are told they have horns coming out of their heads. So there's so much separation. These people never get a chance to be together. And this was just an extraordinary, the effect of praying together essentially for Jerusalem, which really belongs to every major religion, was really healing for everyone involved.
Do you know I have chills all over my body as you're telling that story? It's just incredible. And I mean, what a gift to bring, because again, that separation consciousness that you just mentioned, and the indoctrination through religion, through culture, the separation, what we've been talking to one another, and even political views. You talk about how you're able to bring people from different political point of views together through the power of prayer. And, I was just sharing this story on another show. When I first moved to LA, my roommate, I'm from Germany and I was raised Christian. My roommate was a Muslim from Egypt who had just moved there around the same time I did. And our neighbor was a Jew from Israel. And we would have breakfast every single morning. And LA in a way allowed us to come together. And one day my roommate and our neighbor were sharing that they couldn't even share with their family that we were sitting together having breakfast because the Jews and the Egyptians, the Arabs, were supposed to be enemies. And they couldn't even, and for us coming together outside that country, it actually helped us to overcome these imprints that are so ancient and so needing to be changed. So for me, what you're doing in these experiments, coming together for the power of prayer and realizing my God is your God, what can be, affect on a global scale, or continue to affect, I mean, you already said, but continue to affect on a global scale using the power of prayer. It's incredible.
Well, I think that's the thing that's so interesting. And, I ran an experiment for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and I have been hosted a number of times in the Arab countries by a guy who's like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East. And when I wanted to do something other than watch those burning buildings coming down for the 10th year in a row for 9/11, I thought of him and I thought, well, let's invite his audience and let's invite my Western audience to all come together and send an intention together. So we did, and we had thousands of Arabs, we had thousands of Westerners. We had it on my website in 2 different languages, in English and Arabic. And we sent intention to 2 provinces in southern Afghanistan, while it was in the middle of, heavy fighting. And there was some really interesting and intriguing results. The violence went down to an unprecedented level after it, according to NATO. Just those 2 provinces, too. Wow. So that was really interesting. But again, not the point of the story. It was much more interesting what happened between the Westerners and the Arabs. I had instant messaging pages, and I also had Facebook, and they started contacting each other on, instant messaging each other and Facebooking each other, and they started befriending each other and saying, again, your God is my God, we're brothers from the other side. And they started forgiving each other, too, for 9/11. It was really amazing.
That's amazing. So we're getting close over here to finishing up the show. So one of the questions I always like to ask, what is it that inspires you the most about what you're currently doing?
Well, I think what inspires me is the mystery of it more than anything else. In my book, I go through so many different reasons why this is probably happening. There is the intention, the power of intention. There's the group effect. When groups get together, people get together in a group, there is, as one psychologist put it, a kind of collective effervescence. There's the altruism. That's obviously a big key. But there's also an X factor that maybe we'll never understand. When people come together and essentially pray together in groups, miracles just happen, and they keep happening. And so for me, I've really had to do is kind of let go of my skepticism, my doubting Thomas nature, and really accept that there's a power here that maybe we don't understand, but hey, this is part of that extended human potential that we have. We have the ability to heal each other, and so let's go with it.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And do you have a final message for our audience, Lynne?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when people think about healing themselves, I've certainly learned that don't play small when it comes to healing yourself or trying to heal the world. Always seek power in numbers. And for me, the best number of all is 8, of course.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And tell us one more time where our audience can find you.
Sure. It's LynneMcTaggart.com.
Lynne, it was such a gift to have you on the show today. Thank you. And thank you for all this incredible work you're doing in the world, for being such a rebel, empowering the rebels of the world out there. And again, thank you. It was such an honor to have you here today on Rebel Hearts.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. And Rebel Hearts, that's it for today. And remember to keep rebelling on. We'll see you again next Wednesday.
Future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at UBN Radio.